Hi, good evening, everyone. Um, we will get started very shortly. Just wait until a couple more people join us, and then yeah, we'll get going. But thank you all for attending tonight. Just give it another minute or so, see if anyone else comes in, and then we'll get going. So I think we can get started now, and we'll just admit people if they come in. So yeah, thank you all for um, giving us an hour of your very sunny evening this evening to hear about our Hull and East Yorkshire local nature recovery strategy updates. So just to let everyone know that this session will be recorded up until the point of questions at the end. So the webinar is due to run for an hour and we'll be wrapping up at about 7 o'clock. So we'll have approximately 40 to 45 minutes of updates and then time for questions at the end. So yeah, as I said before, this webinar will be recorded and it will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. All of our previous webinars are linked onto our Commonplace page, so I will put a link to that into the chat if you haven't already accessed that website at all. So I've disabled your camera and microphone access during the presentations and the recording, so I will enable these throughout the Q&A session. But if you do want to submit questions throughout the presentations, please feel free to use the Q&A section. You'll be able to find that up at the top, or you can use the chat as well. So yeah, I think that is all of the housekeeping that I have for you today. We've got a couple of speakers. So we've got James Walsh from Natural England, John Pemberton from East Riding of Yorkshire Council, and Alice Bonifacio from the Hull and East Yorkshire Local Nature Partnership. So without further ado, I will pass on to James Walsh to give a national overview of LNRSs.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm James Walsh. As Emily said, I work for Natural England on local nature recovery strategies across Yorkshire, but with a particular focus on the Hull and East Yorkshire LNRS. So yeah, I just thought I'd, John just asked me to sort of give kind of a national picture just to start off with before we sort of go into a bit more detail on Hull and East Yorkshire LNRS. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Emily. So, I mean, apologies if some of you have seen some of this content before, if you've been to updates with us before or know a bit about LNRS already, but I just thought it was worth re-emphasising a few key points. So this is just a slide that we show just to do kind of a bit of myth busting, really, just to mention a couple of things that LNRSs are not, essentially. So they don't actually give permission to create habitat without the normal permissions that would be required of landowners and other interested parties. They're not actually delivery plans and they're non-binding. So the responsible authority, so in this case East Riding of Yorkshire Council, must prepare an LNRS, but doesn't have to actually deliver the opportunities that are identified. It's more of a tool to focus delivery through other mechanisms. So we'll come on to talk a bit about some of those things like biodiversity net gain and agri-environment schemes and other things. But I'll go on to talk about the delivery mechanisms a bit more in a little bit. And then just to sort of along the same lines, really, they're not lines on maps in the sense of conferring any level of protection. They're not a designation, and they don't prevent existing land uses such as farming and development. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. So just to again, from a sort of introducing from a national context, just to mention a few things around uses of local nature coverage strategies in law. So these strategies were introduced in the Environment Act, the recent Environment Act, and a few of the things that I've mentioned here. So they're used to target biodiversity net gain. So there's a thing called a strategic significance multiplier, which means that areas that are identified as a priority in the LNRS will deliver more credits per hectare of biodiversity net gain. So there's an incentive for developers to use areas identified in the LNRS to deliver biodiversity net gain. So that's one of the key sort of uses. Another one is that there's a duty on public authorities to conserve enhanced environments in the Environment Act. So that's linked to LNRS as well. And then also just to mention recent change of planning law, which is that local planning authorities must have regard to local nature recovery strategies. That wording is because of complicated sort of reasons around that change going through Parliament and sort of various legal ramifications. That is in due course going to be slightly strengthened, that wording, to say that LPAs must take account of LNRS. So it's just like slightly sort of stronger wording that's going to come in on that. And then we'll just go on to the next slide, please, Emily. So just to mention a few other ways that LNRSs will be used or can be used. So to provide information to farmers, landowners and other stakeholders, helping groups of farmers and land managers shape nature recovery priorities on a sort of things like farm clusters and things like that. Identifying opportunities for landscape recovery projects at a sort of slightly larger scale, helping government and responsible authorities target funding for environmental projects. So I'll talk about the funding aspect in a little bit more on the next slide, but that's another way that LNRSs could be used in future. And then to inform arm's length bodies when carrying out their functions, so that people like the Environment Agency and Forestry Commission, and sort of informing them, those organisations, how they can best carry out their functions to support nature recovery in line with the opportunities that are identified through the strategy. And then finally to inform development of protected landscape management plans. So in our area we have the potential Yorkshire Wolds national landscape, which is going through a designation process at the moment. That's not yet established as a national landscape. If it does come to be national landscape, or what used to be referred to as an area of outstanding natural beauty, then that will have a management plan which will be informed by the LNRS. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. So yeah, just a few more potential future uses of LNRS. I mentioned around that these sort of focusing in on funding. So they could be required criteria for government to allocate nature recovery funding potentially, and then sort of looking at delivering a 30 by 30 commitment as well. So 30% of land to be protected by 2030, and then a couple of sort of things around private finance as well. So potentially informing companies who might want to contribute to nature recovery through corporate donations, informing those companies where those interventions might best take place, and then similarly guiding private finance investments in nature, and that's something that is coming to the fore potentially a bit more as a way of funding nature recovery. So yeah, it could help to guide those investments as well. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say. It was just to give an overview of the national picture. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'll pass you on to now to John Pemberton from East Riding of Yorkshire Council.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. So our challenge at the start of this process as the responsible authority for a local nature recovery strategy is to take everything that James has just outlined from a national perspective and to build a tool and a product from the local level up, which then aligns with what it needs to be from the top level down. I'm not going to go through all the steps that we've gone through to get there, because having scanned the attendees today, I know a number of you have been present for previous webinars, and the previous webinars that go through those steps are up on the YouTube channel. So I'll give a quick summary of where we got into with key outputs, and then I'll go over the next 3 to 4 months, which are really crucial in the process. So some of you might remember some monstrous looking flowcharts that we presented in previous webinars on the technical process that we went through to come up with the list of priorities for the Hull and East Yorkshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy. We categorised those generally according to broad habitat categories, and then we created this sort of pseudo habitat category of farmland practice. And the reason for that is because all of the measures that we have and the priorities that we have for nature recovery in our region that came through all of that engagement, the grassland measures, the woodland measures, the river standing water measures, all of those notionally could be delivered on any sort of land that's appropriate irrespective of its current use. So woodland creation could take place on farmland, grassland restoration could take place on farmland, whereas the farming practice priorities and measures are those ones that can be delivered alongside food production without the need for a land use change. So we thought it was important to differentiate them in how we present. But at the end of all of that process, we ended up with 36 priorities for nature recovery that will be going into the draft LNRS. We retain within the LNRS document, when you get to see it hopefully in a few weeks, we have retained what we've called the long list. So that was basically the original list of everything that made sort of technical sense to include as an opportunity for prioritisation. We retained the ones that failed to make it through the prioritisation process because we just felt it was important that they were recognised, but also that they're still important and they can still steer decision making going forwards, even though they're not in the list of LNRS priorities. So they'll still be retained and available in the document. So our broad categories are grassland, woodland, trees and hedgerows, the urban environment, inverted commas, rivers and standing water, marine inlets and transitional waters, which for our area is dominated by the River Hull, but we do have other rivers meeting salt water at other points along our coastline, and then the coast itself. And just a reminder that the statutory boundary of the LNRS only goes down to mean low water, so the marine environment is outside of scope for local nature recovery strategies as they currently stand. And then the last bit we did before we move on to the next slide is throughout the process, we realised that a lot of the feedback that we were getting from technical experts, ecologists, land managers, as well as the general public, were not sort of habitat focused, creating or enhancing habitat focused measures. They were things like, we need to understand X, we need to collect data on Y, we need to educate and raise awareness on Z. So we ended up creating a third category called supporting activities, and these are activities that we think are really critical to being able to achieve the measures and priorities. So what has become apparent throughout this process for Hull and East Yorkshire is that we live in a very data poor region, and we don't have a lot of access to good contemporary ecological data. So when we're trying to prioritise what should happen where, we actually don't have a lot of great data to base that decision on. So these supporting activities identify, in large number of cases, sort of data gaps that we need to try and fill before the next iteration of the LNRS, so that we can try and prioritise the whats and the wheres and the whys with a more robust data set. If you go on to the next slide, please, Emily. So One of the things that's taking up a lot of our time right now is turning the document from black and white text into something that's hopefully accessible and engaging. So we've got some proofs here of a couple of pages of the strategy document itself, but what these also do is demonstrate what these priorities and measures actually look like, which is the important part really of this slide. So we've got an excerpt here from the wetlands section within the LNRS and the 3 of the priorities that have made it in. There are other pages in wetland, these aren't the only ones. So just to give you an idea as to how the priorities then break down into measures and are then linked to supporting activities. So I'm actually going to jump down to the bottom one there because it's got 2 measures associated with it, whereas the first 2 have only got 1. So the wetland priority 3 there is to enhance, restore and create lowland fen sites through a staged approach, allowing hydrological and natural succession where possible. And then the 2 measures associated with that priority are to improve floristic and invertebrate diversity through water level management, grazing, cutting regimes. And the second one is to expand and create fen habitat to improve connectivity where feasible. So going back to James's presentation when he was talking about strategic significance and the 15% uplift, it's those measures in the mapped locations that will attract the 15% uplift, and hopefully, looking forward, other funding opportunities and funding pots that become available through government or other means over the next decade. And then within those, the supporting activities that we've identified, so the things we need to do to try and make those measures happen are to map the existing remnant lowland fen sites, because again, we do exist in a very data poor region, and to liaise and work with land managers on the agri-environment options and the advice needed to create those habitats in the first place. So what we tried to do with the priorities and measures is start at the very high level with the overall priority for the region, break it down into spade in the ground type activities, and then some of the more softer administrative collaborative type activities that will encourage those measures to actually be implemented by those people who are in a position to make decisions in terms of land management. If you just go forward to the next slide, please, Emily. And then the biggie is the map. So I think those of you who were in the last webinar would have seen this screen before. So the map is how we think most people will probably engage with the LNRS, especially those who are making decisions on land management. So one of the statutory components, and probably the key statutory component, is the production of what's called in the legislation a local habitat map. Within our LNRS, we're referring to it as a nature recovery network because we think that that's a bit more accessible, and the feedback we've had from stakeholders is that sort of reflects what it actually a bit more accurately. So on the map in front of you, the dark green is our proposed nature recovery network. So that's where the priorities for nature recovery across the county are, as far as the evidence suggests. What you can't see on this map, because it's a still and not the interactive product, is that when you click on this map, you will get the appropriate measures in the appropriate location. And I've got a couple of stills to show in a second. The red dots on this map are purely for the purposes of activities like this. They won't appear on the final version, but those are locations that throughout all of the engagement we've carried out over the last 2 years, stakeholders have suggested should be prioritised for nature recovery or should be considered. So I think it serves to show that the computer model that's created the mapping has, by and large, also captured the locations that are being put forward by members of the public, organisations across the board. And that's not surprising because most of those locations were designated sites. They're nature-rich places that people are familiar with, and the designated sites are the core of the nature recovery network. So this is the product of an incredibly complex set of computer models. We made the decision very early doors that this needed to be robust and transparent and stand up to accusations of specific agendas being reflected or just having the right people in the room. We believe that we've come up with a methodology that is robust and defendable. And when we get to the consultation piece, people are feeding back on the mapping. I'd encourage anyone who's considering responding to the consultation to feedback based upon the methodology rather than the output. It's a crude analogy and it's one that we've been using throughout, but the map at the end is the cake that comes out of the oven, whereas the methodology and the data that's gone into the model are the instructions and the set of ingredients. So the data that's gone in is absolutely critical to the model that comes out, and we've had a very, again, from a transparency perspective, a very robust approach to only accommodating data that is accessible to allow members of the public or external organisations to be able to scrutinise it. So if we've had data that's essentially under lock and key from licence that we could potentially use but isn't then accessible, we made the decision very early in the process not to use that. Oh, sorry, Emily, go next slide, please. Right. So this is a really, again, a crude screenshot from the beta version of the map, zoomed in around Allarthorpe Common in Pocklington. But the functionality of the map would be you click in a specific location, you'll get a little pop-up. There'll be a series of windows to click through depending on how many measures are appropriate for that location. And the measure that will be incentivised through biodiversity net gain and potentially other funding pots in the future will pop up. There will be windows before this sort of highlighting figures for the potential for woodland, potential for grassland, etc. But from the perspective of the LNRS being a decision-making tool, this is the tool part of that. This is the bit that says where, what the best measures are, and in which location. It will not prevent somebody from doing something different in these locations if it's their land and they're in a position to do so. If it says grassland recovery and a land manager wants to plant trees, nothing will stop them from doing that. But BNG will not incentivise it. You will not get a 15% uplift. If you go to the next slide, please, Emily. And then this map is sort of just differentiates between what are termed areas of existing importance, which are the dark green. So those are basically our existing designated sites. So you can see from the dark green in this map, we don't have a lot of designation away from the Humber, and where we do, it's really broad spread and scattered across the county. So building a network which tried to link as many of those as possible has been really challenging, and it results in the shape that you see in the light blue. So the light blue are what within the LNRS regs are referred to as areas that could become important for biodiversity. So they're essentially the areas that we want to prioritise nature recovery action taking place. It's really, really important that the message is out there when LNRS goes live, though. That doesn't mean nature recovery efforts outside of this network are not important. It's absolutely important everywhere. It's just if decisions have to be made on where funding should go and for what, this is where we will get the biggest bang for a buck, ecologically speaking. And a lot of it makes sense here. There's obviously a big congregation along the Chalk River in the Riverhall Valley, again from east to west along the Humber, and again down the Derwent. So I think it's reassuring that this network largely mirrors work that had been done previously through experts, I think 10, 15 years ago. It just covers more of the county. So this network as it stands represents 45% of East Yorkshire's landmass. If you jump on to the next slide, please, Emily. So we are just finalising the drafting of the document. So just to give you a sneak peek as to the sort of stylisation, this will be what is available when we get to statutory consultation, which hopefully won't be too far away. If you jump on the next slide, please. And the next slide. And then the key next steps that we're working towards now, we've sort of got 3 parallel work streams. I won't touch too much on delivery because Alice will be talking about that in a second, but the here and now is statutory consultation. So we've got 5 approval steps within East Riding Council to go through to get to statutory consultation. We've already been subject to a 28-day consultation with Natural England and Hull City Council, as well as an assessment panel with Natural England, of which the Forestry Commission and Environment Agency were also part of. And we received a list of recommendations to implement back in January. And along with there was no objection to us proceeding to statutory consultation. So post that, we've gone through 4 of the 5 approval steps within East Riding Council. The last of which will be in the middle of April, when hopefully we will get approval to proceed to statutory consultation. If we do get that, then we'll be looking at statutory consultation in the aftermath of the mayoral election. So we'll probably, all being well, be launching statutory consultation in the first week of May. After that, how long it takes us to get from a draft to a final strategy really depends upon the feedback we get at consultation stage and how much changing we have to do as a result of it. I appreciate many of you here might be, or presumably would be interested in responding to consultation either as individuals or on behalf of organisations. Going back to what I was saying about the map, I think it's really important when consultation responses are coming in that it's not just the end product, but the methodology that's gone into getting to that point, which is it's really important that we get feedback on that, because again, the end product is part of the picture. The process that we've gone through to get to it is really the important part. And then, all being well, we'll be looking at first quarter of 2026 for a full launch of the local nature recovery strategy. Parallel to that, I'll let Alice touch on delivery as much as we can, but we're also starting to look at monitoring and what the monitoring for LNRS and nature recovery across East Yorkshire could look like in parallel to delivery. The responsible authorities for developing the LNRS do have a statutory responsibility to monitor and report, although the delivery, as James mentioned, is not statutory, and it's going to be down to partnership working. At the moment, there's an absence of national guidance on what this will look like, so we are trying to take a sort of a Yorkshire-wide, well, East Yorkshire first, and then hopefully we'll be able to work with our neighbouring authorities to come up with something that works locally, because the monitoring is really, really important. It needs to be something that landowners and land managers want to participate in. Otherwise, we may well have good work taking place, but we won't be able to report back and how that's contributing to national targets. Next slide, please. So last slide from me, which is just, again, the consultation. So the key focus of the consultation will be on those statutory components, so our priorities, our measures, the description of the strategy area, the functionality and the user interface of the mapping alongside the methodology. And then we will be asking questions around delivery. And so that's sort of looking forward and whether there are organisations, landowners, farmers, etc., who are able to support delivery, or if they know somebody who may well be able to. So are there plans in place for nature recovery efforts that could contribute to this project going forward? And I think that's my last slide. Yes, so I'll stop talking and hand over to Alice, if that's all right.
Thanks, John. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Alice Bonifacio, and I'm the Partnership Project Officer for the Hull and East Yorkshire Local Nature Partnership. I see some familiar names on the call, so good to have you with us. Next slide, please, Emily. So for those of you that aren't familiar with what local nature partnerships are, or who the Hull and East Yorkshire Local Nature Partnership are, we are one of 47 LNPs across England that were established in 2012. So this was part of the government's natural environment white paper ambitions. And we function as a sort of arm's length body of the East Riding of Yorkshire Council. And we were set up to strengthen local action and change how we work with the natural environment at a local level, demonstrating its economic and societal benefits. So a lot of our work includes topics such as natural capital, health and well-being, green skills, nature tourism, and so on. We also chair the East Yorkshire Invasive Non-Native Species Steering Group, so that operates across the region, and the Development Officer, Matt Millington, also sits on the Yorkshire-wide INS group, so often sort of feeding into different ways that we can work together collaboratively to tackle different invasive non-native species. We work across lots of different sectors, so the business sector, environment, local government, community and public health sectors, and our board members include lots of different organisations that you'll probably recognise. So alongside the council, the National Farmers Union, Groundwork Yorkshire, Natural England, the Environment Agency, Hull City Council, the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, the Marine Management Organisation and the University of Hull. Next slide, please, Emily. So in terms of our involvement with the LNRS, we have helped to co-develop the LNRS in sort of different ways. So my colleague Matt, who's not with us this evening, has been very heavily involved in the sort of nuts and bolts of putting together the LNRS and advising from an ecological perspective as well. And we've also supported with engagement with partnerships. And one thing that we did last year was we set up a local nature photography competition, which I believe many of you shared, for which I'm very grateful, and also submitted your own images, which was just lovely to see. And it was great to see what the local environment means to people living in the region and working in the region. And that was a great success. And from that, we have taken the winning images and we've put them in the final LNRS document, which, as John said, will be published soon. So you'll be able to view the images there, but I've just included a couple just there at the bottom on the slide. We also led discussions on delivery, as John mentioned. So just to make quite clear that this is very different and very separate from the development stage. So there's no established funding from this. There's no obligation to actually kind of deliver anything. But obviously, if we're going to put together a strategy, then we want to see something come out of it. And we will be reporting to the government, as John mentioned, every 3 to 10 years on how things are getting on. So just kind of prompting any other guidance from government, we started to have some conversations with local partners and people that had been involved technically within the development of the LNRS to date. So we had some workshops last year. And just to share with you a couple of outcomes of those delivery workshops. So it was noted that there was more of a preference for delivery to be led by an existing partnership. And the conclusion was that perhaps the Hull and East Yorkshire local nature partnership are well placed to lead on this, but that there would need to be some restructuring to our sort of governance and to how we work, because at the moment it's just me and Matt, so that's quite a lot for us to take on in terms of delivery. However, we've got lots of wonderful partners, many of whom are in this Teams room. So yeah, thank you very much as well for those of you that inputted in those workshops. And just to also make clear that nothing is definitive in terms of delivery at this stage. We're really keen to hear from interested groups as to how this could work. We anticipate that this is going to be quite a sort of a piece of clay that will be constantly being molded, but there will be opportunities at consultation phase to be able to feed into ideas for delivery. So do watch this space. Next slide, please, Emily. So just in terms of next steps, just a few other things to highlight that were on the LNP agenda. So myself and Matt sit within the Nature Recovery All-Party Parliamentary Group. So what that is we've been promoting the roles of LNPs and also the LNRS agenda in Westminster. So I attended the very first meeting in Westminster last month. And it's very much part of the agenda to put LNRS on the table in front of ministers and push that agenda forwards, particularly in light of the spending review and a couple of other elements, such as the planning and infrastructure bill. So just looking forwards to delivery. I feel that these conversations are quite timely. And also our role, as I said, will be bridging the gap between LNRS development and delivery, and scoping out new partners for delivery, including community groups, businesses, the NGOs, local government, the farming sector, public health, etc. So that applies to many of you. And we're also going to be monitoring some future funding opportunities for delivery. So some of you will be aware that we submitted an expression of interest for the Nature Towns and Cities Fund, and we'll be looking to other opportunities in the future as well to support with delivery and with our work. Just also to share with you that we will be launching a new website, hopefully in the next few weeks. And I've included our website address just there in a positive, preemptive way to get you all to visit us. So yeah, that's pretty much everything from me. And thank you for your time.
Perfect. Thank you to all of our speakers tonight. That was great. I've noticed that we've got a couple of questions, so I'm just going to stop the recording now. And yeah, we'll get on to questions.
Emily, can I just jump in for a second before we do
Yes.
questions? Just, I don't know what the questions are, so this might be irrelevant, but it's worth saying that as a council, we are currently in a pre-election period because of the mayoral combined elections. So we are not in a position to, I guess, discuss anything which could prejudice for or against any of the political parties involved in that. So in short, we won't be able to answer anything that's very political because of that pre-election period.
Thank you.